Well, on behalf of all of us here at the Unstuck Group, welcome to today's webinar on navigating rapid church growth without getting stuck. This is a really fun topic for us, and we're excited to share what we hope is very helpful conversation for you today. Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment and introduce myself and my teammate, Amy Anderson. So my name is Sean Bublitz. I'm the Director of Operations here at the Unstuck Group, and for the past 7 years, I've served in several different roles in consulting, sales, and now operations roles here on our team. Previously, I had a chance to serve at a couple of great churches, Community Christian Church in the Chicagoland area and Granger Community Church in Granger, Indiana, overseeing weekend services, arts, and in senior leadership roles on the team. Amy, it's great to have you on today's conversation. Want to take a second and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, great to be here with you, Sean, and with all of our participants today. I've been the Director of Consulting at the Unstuck Group for 10 years now, and during this time, I've been on the ground with over 150 churches and many more in our leadership cohorts, just helping them design ministry, staffing, multi-site strategies, all those things that align and fuels their mission. My husband we've been married 33 years. He is a lead pastor at a multi-site church here in my community. So what I love is not only do I get to serve local churches, but very much a part of one and get to see ministry on the front line each and every week. And of course, prior to joining Unstuck, I was on a ministry team here on the executive team at Eagle Brook Church, which is a large multi-site church. Man, we grew crazy from 2,000 to 20,000 over the 12, 13 years that I was there. And I was a leader over our weekend services. And even as I say that, please know that was just God's doing, God's hand, because I know myself and all the leaders who were there when it happened, it was just a work of the Lord. But obviously taught me a lot, and I love the local church. So working with churches that are growing and multiplying is just an amazing place to be.
Yeah. And Amy, you know this, in my role at the Unstuck Group, I talk with literally dozens of senior ministry leaders every week. And something significant, it feels like, has changed over the last 18 to maybe 24 months. That malaise of the pandemic is gone. And the majority of churches that are contacting us for help right now are actually experiencing stuckness as a result of their rapid growth and the momentum that's happening in their church, rather than as a result of decline.
Yeah, Sean, I'm experiencing the same thing in my consulting work. And what I get to work with churches on are what I call the good problems, meaning, the church is growing so fast that it's outgrown the staff. Maybe they need to hire some key roles, but they're not sure what to hire first. Other churches' facilities are just bursting at the seams on the weekend, and the leaders are unsure of what to do next. And there's many different ways to solve space issues. You can start a building campaign to expand the space, add a service, considering going multi-site, but leaders just in this season are not sure which route to take. And for most senior pastors, really, they're probably leading the biggest church they've ever led. And with that comes the weight of decision-making and making hard calls. It comes with the risk involved in decision-making and making tough calls. Paul Alexander, who's a consultant on our team, he said on a call the other day that the larger the church, the more discomfort the leader is going to experience. The larger the church, the more discomfort the leader is going to experience. And as he said that, that is such a great phrase. And so if you're listening today and you're feeling that way, it's normal. And add to that, with growth just comes more things to lead, more things to manage, more meetings to go to, more service times, sometimes more direct reports, and then the need for more leaders and volunteers. And those are all good things, but too much more, and we get to capacity, right? And then just unhealth can begin to creep in. So while growth is exciting and growth brings the good kind of challenges, here's the warning. And it's really the purpose of this webinar today. In growth seasons like this, we can allow just little seeds of misalignment to germinate. And if we aren't aware of that and what strategic next steps we need to take, it's really easy to get caught up into solving the urgent problems to the neglect of the strategic work that needs to be done in a growth season.
Yeah. Amy, one specific example of this type of momentum is actually Upward Christian Church in North Carolina, who you and I have been working with for a number of years. Last time we checked, they'd actually grown by 30% year over year. Mm-hmm. They were up to 3 services on Sunday morning and a Thursday night service as well. And we were just on site with them in the last several months to help them develop their multi-site strategy so they can launch their first Upward campus. And it's an exciting momentum season at Upward, but Pastor Andy there would tell you that it really has brought its own set of challenges and stressors.
Yeah, I love that team. They're doing such a great work. I'm actually currently working with Cedar Crest Church in Georgia, and they've grown by 40% year over year. And they're currently in a construction project, which will open up, I think, an additional 200 seats. But like many of us who have gone through those high growth seasons, they already realize, I mean, while the cement is still wet, that 200 seats really won't be enough. So we're working through strategic structure plans, priority positions, priority hires. And additionally, we're actually exploring new strategies to accommodate the growth. So like Upward, I mean, I was smiling as you were sharing that story. It's exciting. It's an exciting time to lead a growing church. But I think Pastor Van at Cedar Crest would be the first to echo that growth has its own set of challenges and stressors.
Yeah. So as you watch this webinar today, we want to challenge you to commit to do an alignment check with your team. And by the end of the event today, you're going to have what you need to be able to do that. So we're going to walk through how to approach this in 3 phases of the conversation. Phase 1 is how to identify the warning signs of misalignment. Phase 2 is building a unified direction for your team and your church. And then phase 3 is going to be aligning your team around action. So a few more details before we get into that content. There is a companion workbook to go with today's conversation. If you haven't downloaded that yet, you can go to theunstuckgroup.com/workbook and download that. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end of today's webinar. Amy and I will be taking your questions. And so Tiffany, Amy, myself will be interacting on chat, helping to identify some of those questions that come in. Use that Q&A button on your Zoom window and input a question there that we can get to at the end of the webinar. If we're not able to get to all of them, we'll try to write up a follow-up blog post and address any questions that you have that we don't get to. And then last thing, you can actually share today's conversation, questions, comments, things that you have, things that stood out to you on X, formerly Twitter, or Facebook, and just use the hashtag UnstuckChurch, hashtag UnstuckChurch. All right, Amy, let's get into today's conversation. In this first phase of the conversation for today, pastors need to really learn to identify the warning signs that tell them that their church's rapid growth is leading to competing priorities and increased complexity. So I want to share a picture of the life cycle of a church. And back in 2017, Tony Morgan wrote this book, The Unstuck Church, and identified 7 phases of a typical church life cycle. And I just want to take a minute and kind of focus in on this momentum growth phase, because that's the phase that so many of the churches in our tribe, in the Unstuck tribe, find themselves in today. And I love talking about this phase, Amy, because it's exciting to experience it as a ministry leader. I mean, sometimes churches in this phase can hardly handle the number of new guests, salvations that are happening every week at their church, and friends are inviting friends to church. That momentum just starts to feel contagious. And typically the focus for the churches in the momentum growth phase is to make space for more people, usually through adding services or, like you mentioned, facility space, or through that multi-site strategy. But of course, we know as we do this, naturally things are going to become more complex. The truth is that even with this momentum, you can get stuck in this phase of the life cycle just as you can in any phase of the church's life cycle. So let's talk about some of the warning signs that misalignment is starting to happen from this momentum growth stage.
Yeah, Sean, I think it's good to share that in this stage of the church life cycle, especially for churches that aren't aware of the warning signs, misalignment is actually like a normal part of momentum growth. Quoting Tony, our founder, when he was reflecting on momentum growth, he said, over time, complexity will overpower leadership. The church will outgrow its building and the team will struggle with new challenges. But he said, don't be discouraged, because this is a normal and key component in the growth of the church. But, and here's the but, the continued health of your church depends on how you take your next steps. So unaddressed, the complexities of growth can actually stall out your growth. But when they're addressed strategically, it can actually propel you to that next phase of the life cycle, which is strategic growth. So, Sean, you asked me, what are some of the common warning signs? I think one warning sign is if you recognize we really don't have a clear vision, if there's an absence of a clear vision. And of course, a vision is where are we going? Tangible destination that we're going over the next 3 to 5 years. When it's not, here's some of the symptoms you might see. Ministry goals or wins are vague. In fact, I was just at a church, I was looking at their charts, and they said, we get scope creep on our activities because we have very soft goals right now. They really aren't clear. Mm-hmm. So if there's confusion over what the win is, or if you see people actually defining the win differently on different teams. And I think this one, it's sometimes hard to see when we're chasing competing wins when you're in a high growth season, because I think people on your team actually feel like they're winning. Because after all, you're drawing crowds, people are showing up at events and programs. But honestly, that just might be busyness. So that's the first one. And related to this, I think it's easy for ministry leaders in this season to start kind of uber focusing on the wins for themselves or for their team. And they're beginning to silo. And for those of you listening today, if you sense siloing on your ministry team, just know that that foundation really is from a lack of alignment. As we walk through the strategic alignment period in a little bit, when we don't have a solid foundation, we will easily get misaligned. So silos are often fueled by a focus on programs, filling the calendar with activities, and the win, whether we care to admit it or not, can easily just become about getting more people to show up at our ministry events. So silos ultimately create a situation where there's just lots of different wins being defined by lots of different people. So the power of a clear vision is that in momentum growth, especially, is that it can harness that growth and propel you up the life cycle of the church life cycle, getting everyone aligned on where you're going and the why behind and the what success looks like, what the real wins are. So that's the first one, lack of a clear vision. Another warning sign of misalignment is when leaders are actually just holding on too long, meaning that they're not empowering new people to handle things. And what they really need to be doing is really to start focusing on what only they can do. So we talk about this a lot for the lead pastors, right? The goal of every lead pastor of a growing, healthy church is to get to those 4 things they can't delegate. Be the vision caster, be the lead culture bearer, be the spiritual leader, especially through teaching, and then be very active in your senior leadership team because you are the leader of leaders at your church. I'm working with a great church right now. I think they're somewhere in the 3,000 mark, 3,500 mark. Anyways, they're very full. They're growing. And their lead pastor, he does those 4 things. But over the years, he's just kept on a little bit of that, probably the finance piece, a little bit of the left-brained. If you ever do our leading from your strengths, that analytic side, he can dabble into that operations area. And I was talking with him and his executive director, and he just said, okay, my next job is to fully retire as the executive pastor and really let the executive pastor be the executive pastor. So that was a good one. If you're an executive pastor, this applies to you too. You might be holding on to things too long. We often say there's 3 things you can't delegate. You have to be focused on integrating the vision through the team. So making vision actionable, driving core initiatives, and making sure you're leading a high impact team, which of course by definition is we are going to make an impact, we're going to get results, but we're also going to be healthy while we do that. And for executive pastors, sometimes what I see in these high growth stages that you are actually the leaders that start to take on too many direct reports. And again, span of care becomes critical to a healthy organization. Myself, 5 is probably my cap to do it really well. But I've worked with many executive pastors where they've got 12, 13 direct reports. And honestly, it's just too many. For the ministry leaders, really, when I talk about focusing on what only you can do, that is all about giving ministry away. Now, I know like in the worship area, we've got some specialists, hard to give that away. But when it comes to family ministries, next gen, when it comes to adult discipleship, really your role is to identify and raise up the body of Christ to find their place in the ministry. I was recently talking to a friend of mine, Kem Meyer, who used to work with Tony Morgan. And Tony actually hired Kem into ministry. And I don't know if you remember me sharing this, Sean, but he basically told her, hey, Kem, we hired you because you're brilliant, you're great track record. We're so excited to have you part of the team. And in his Tony-esque way then said, but just know, going forward, working here at Granger, you will not be rewarded on what you do. You will be rewarded on what you give others and release others to go do. So back to that, just leaders holding on too long. As you're growing, we have to continually be moving ministry into the body of Christ and getting our leader hat on to conduct and lead the ministry.
Yeah, Amy, that's really good. And I actually have some personal experience with this. Years ago at my previous church, our senior leadership team struggled to get aligned around a clear vision, like you talked about. And part of that it was not feeling fully empowered for sure, but the vision had actually drifted to becoming more about a building project in the season of momentum that we were experiencing, rather than the people that we were trying to reach and the ministry we dreamed of seeing happen through that building project. And what was frustrating at the time, we just had such great momentum. And so much so that we were needing to expand really an already very large facility. We were also launching a new campus, and we were just riding that wave of momentum. But because of the lack of clarity from the top, all of these things that you've described, Amy, started to happen to us. We saw silos begin to form around the things ministry leaders felt that they could keep control over. Our brightest, most innovative thinkers stopped dreaming, and some of them actually eventually left our church. And we certainly didn't agree on what the ultimate win was. We agreed on our mission, why we existed, but our approach to accomplishing that mission was really murky at the time. And ultimately, we started to see decline happening when one time we felt like we couldn't do anything wrong, and now the church was experiencing a lack of health. And I think the lesson is, don't discount how important that is for your church during that growth and momentum season, to stay unified around a clear direction forward for your church.
Mm-hmm.
So before we move on, I want to give you a moment to process this on your own or with your team. You know, everybody on your staff may be doing good things, but when your team members pull in different directions, your church is going to get stuck. So take just a moment and reflect on whether any of these warning signs resonate with you. Where is the rapid growth causing people to really pull in different directions on your team? Give you just a few moments, write down a thought or two, and then we'll be back with phase 2. All right, Amy, so let's get really practical now. We're going to share a few tools that you can use to keep your church's systems, strategies, structures, and programs aligned with your overall mission and vision.
Great. Well, I think the strategic alignment pyramid is always a place that we like to start with any church we're serving. And as we could put this up, Sean, I'm going to skip the foundational level today because I think most churches have that defined. Instead, I want to walk through this middle section, or the directional level of it. So at that vision level, what we were just talking about, alignment starts with a vision. And if you don't have one, you need one. And if you do have one, just remember it needs to be in front of your people. Anytime you've been growing rapidly, you have more and more new people who are unfamiliar with the vision. So it does need to be refreshed and repeated. And as we've said, without a clear and compelling vision, people will fill in the gaps and begin to pull in different directions. Tony used to say, when there's a vision void, the loudest person shapes that future direction. In fact, how we draw this is we eventually have just little pyramids floating around all at the top if we lose the alignment at the vision piece. So churches that make their way from momentum to strategic growth know that having a clear vision is part of the key to maintain momentum and alignment in their church. So again, vision answers, where are we going? What are we rallying around? We talk about this as your next bold move. So every church needs to define this, but especially in momentum growth. This again is a powerful way to harness that momentum. So the next layer up there is they're the mission goals. Maybe we call them organizational goals. This brings clarity to what success looks like over the next 12 months for our church as a whole. It answers, what do we believe God wants to do through our church this next year? And it's little, but those goals actually come before the next layer, which is the how. And I think that's important, because if we ask, what are we going to do? Then the second question is, and what do we think that'll accomplish? I think God wants us to go, God, what do you want us to accomplish? And now how can we do that? So the next layer there are the ministry strategies. And this is once we brought clarity to what success looks like, now we need to bring clarity to the primary ministry strategies that are going to help us accomplish those goals. So often this is around what's our main strategy for reaching people? What's our main discipleship strategies? What are the strategies we're going to enact? What's the how for accomplishing our vision? And one thing I want to note, Sean, around this section is the strategies, the decision rights for those strategies really lie within the senior leadership team. Here's what I mean by that. So I was a leader over our weekend services, but it was not my job to go, hey, I think we're going to throw the message at the beginning of the service, and then we're going to move away from that, kind of Lincoln Brewster Hillsong style. We're going all in with Bethel elevation style. Like those were all things for me to be thinking about, in order to become more effective on the weekend. But I alone could not just change that strategy. So it's just an important one to remember. And then on top of there is the structure. And of course, this is where we need to align our structure to those ministry strategies and, of course, bring clarity to the responsibilities of each leader, especially at that top layer of the organization. So, for example, let's look at the role of lead pastor. So in momentum growth, there needs to be a shift in what the lead pastor is leading. Up until now, for some churches, the lead pastor maybe has been involved in making a lot of decisions. Sometimes they're just in the weeds of ministry. And in many cases, they probably needed to be in the weeds for that season of ministry. But in momentum growth, it needs to change. And if it's not addressed, I think this can actually become the bottleneck for growth, kind of even shutting down this season of growth. So the lead pastor needs to shift from being in the weeds to focusing on those 4 things he or she can't delegate. And in order to do that, of course, the lead pastor needs to ensure that they have the right leadership roles around them. And let me start with roles. We have to think through what leadership roles do we need. Then they need the right people in those roles to really carry the weight of ministry decisions. And honestly, Sean, without this clarity, without having those right senior leaders around the lead pastor, siloing and misalignment again will creep in. So most of the churches that I have served this past year were large growing churches. And I would say probably over 90% of them had lead pastors that were carrying too many responsibilities, and it was often due to the lack of leadership capacity around them. So we'll come back to this last layer, the action layer in the pyramid in a few minutes, but I just want to make it clear again that setting the directional level of your pyramid is the responsibility of your senior leadership team, and it needs to be done in order to stay unified and aligned. I actually love this quote from Built to Last by, we see Jim Collins and Jerry is Porras, I think. They said, building a visionary company requires 1% vision and 99% alignment. So the vision needs to be there, but that alignment work above the line is what's even more critical, because when there's alignment, everyone in the organization has clarity around their roles and how they connect to the bigger picture. Team members are in tune with what success looks like. They're able to hold loosely to the methods, much tighter to the mission. Priorities are clear and pruning's possible. But on the flip side, when there's no alignment, success is really not being defined by the organization. It's really being designed by the individual leaders and the separate ministry areas of the church.
Yeah, Amy, actually, as you were talking through bold moves and how the bold moves and vision can help keep alignment within our team, I actually started to think of some of the churches we've worked with and the bold moves that they've developed, and for some churches, their bold moves will look like becoming more multi-generational as a church, maybe going multi-site for the first time. Maybe it's solving a core need in their community. A number of years ago, we helped 2 churches in Iowa to merge and become now New City Church. And each pastor at their church felt that their individual church didn't really reflect the community they were trying to reach. And the vision of the new church with these 2 pastors was to become more multi-ethnic, multi-generational as a church in order to better reach their mission field and the mission field that God had placed them in. And they were successful in that, healthy, growing church now. But that was a bold move for those 2 churches to come together in that way. We've told the story, I think, a couple of times of onechurch.to in Toronto, but it's too good not to share again. We worked with them a number of years ago, and one of the bold moves that they developed was 100,000 acts of love in their community within 5 years. And they actually developed a system to track these kind of expressions of care in their community. And what was awesome is they met their goal in about half the time that they set out, just because of that intentionality and alignment behind it. So making bold moves really is the opposite of being stuck. It's how vision becomes something that's actionable for your church and you actually start moving towards.
And just as we close out this section, I'm going to repeat myself, but here's the key to staying unified and aligned. Your leadership team needs to be committed to setting that directional level every year. Again, our friend Paul Alexander, who's the executive pastor at Sun Valley Church in the Phoenix area, multisite church, he says it this way. He says he credits the continued health and alignment of Sun Valley through many spurts of growth. It's been their consistent strategic obedience to planning. So if you're on the leadership team at your church, the executive pastor, you just need to set a regular meeting rhythm to review your strategies, to set goals, to identify the priority initiatives that'll help you accomplish your mission and vision. That means setting aside 2 days every year for the big planning, getting the right people in the room to develop those action plans, and then, check in and review them every 90 days. For every church that works with us, Sean, I thought it might be just good to show kind of what we mean by priority initiative. Sometimes that can be confusing, but you can see this church, they came out of their 2-day planning process with that alignment, that directional level set. But these were the core priority initiatives they needed to build teams around. One, they needed to launch a third service to expand. Second, they needed to do some right sizing and pruning to focus the ministry programming. We were just talking about that above. And third, they need to clarify and implement their discipleship pathway. So those are cross-functional teams. These are initiatives above and beyond the week-to-week of ministry, and this is what they wanted to get accomplished in the next 12 months. So when you begin a rhythm of planning and the muscle of implementation and follow-through, you'll just experience more alignment, and you'll find your team is on the same page in ways you've never seen them before.
That's good. Yeah. Well, before we move on, just everybody who's tuned in today, take just a moment and put a star by any layers on the directional level that you're sensing you need to revisit during your season of growth right now. So take them back to your next strategic leadership team meeting. And you don't want to delay on this very long, because in momentum growth, you've got to keep things moving forward in the building blocks, developing the building blocks for strategic growth. So I'm going to give you just a moment here. Put a star by any of those layers on the directional level that you're sensing need revisited. And then we'll be back with phase 3. Okay, Amy, so this brings us to the last phase of our conversation today, and that's aligning your team around action. This last step is the one that is constantly on the mind, I think, of senior and executive pastors we work with. And that is, they're asking, how do I get my team to follow through and produce the most effective results in their day-to-day work? And there's no doubt that their teams are working hard. They're definitely busy, but most pastors have this lingering question: are they doing what's most important right now?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. I hear that often from top leaders who are disconnected maybe with what people are actually working on. And I actually work with a lot of large churches on their staffing and structure plans. And it's definitely a headline question in a mix of my conversations with senior pastors. And it's a fair question, but I think that churches who haven't brought clarity to that directional level of the pyramid actually have to look in the mirror first and recognize that without that clarity, they really can't expect the organization to be laser focused on the right things. So step one is getting that directional level defined so that we can set up the entire team to know and pay attention to what's most important.
Yeah, that's fair, because here's what I know to be true. All ministry is good. Most team members are doing good things, right? And people who work on a church staff are rarely considered lazy. Most often it's the opposite of that, right? But the question is, are they spending their time on the most important things?
Yeah, the phrase that I've been using with churches lately has been, you don't want to have busy ministries, you want to have focused ministries. And I think the same can be said about our ministry leaders. We don't want ministry leaders just busy, we want them focused. And that's where the action level of the pyramid comes in. The directional level did definitions around the organizational things we want to have happen. The action level really defines the more detailed, and this is what we want to be happening ministry by ministry. So at that ministry strategies, this is where every ministry leader should get clarity from their leader. This is what success for you and your ministry looks like. So for example, if I'm the kids ministry pastor, I now know what my kids ministry attendance goal is and how that links back to our overall attendance role. I know what my baptism goal is and how that links back to the overarching goal. I know how many volunteers that I need to have engaged and how many volunteer leaders. So anyways, it's just a mini scorecard from the overarching scorecard. Mm-hmm. And again, I sometimes get pushback. I just did last week, this church who has softer goals. But the truth is those goals just help us think strategically and align our work. Yep. And every number is a person. I told this church, if you have to set a goal that ends with the number 1, like we're going to grow by 201 people just to emphasize that one is a person, do that. But numbers are people. So as we talk through them, they're good. And then above that is really we call it personal priorities based on our scorecard and what we want to try to accomplish. How am I going to design my time? What are the lead activities that I'm going to engage in order to impact what we call that lag goal? So I thought it would be helpful maybe to just take a look at an example, Sean, of one church's, how they translate organizational goals to their ministry priorities. So if you look at this sample organizational goals, you'll see that kids attendance was at 660 for 2024. Their goal for next year is 725. You can see the same targets with baptism. So this is just the overarching scorecard for the church. So now we go down to how do we break all those goals out by ministry, by senior leaders, excuse me. So this is just a sample chart again of for each of those major metrics, who the leader is on the team. So you can kind of see when we look at kids attendance, we're saying the family ministry leader owns that, as does the student attendance is there. The baptisms, 100 is going to be in family ministries out of the 175. So the next step is then we translate that down to ministry areas. So in this case, they have a larger team for their family ministries. So we look at kids attendance. You can see that breaks out by the pre-K leader, by the elementary leader, by the middle school leader, by the high school leader. So I don't know if you guys like numbers, but as you look at this chart, I just want you to get the essence. We are continuously breaking down the big goals so that every leader on your team understands what part they own. So I'm going to call out the elementary leader next just to look. You can see their attendance goals. You can see their baptisms and all of that. So if we look at this sample personal priorities, again, this is the top of the pyramid, the personal priorities. You see their targets there under 2025. And let me just read a few of these, of their personal priorities, how they're going to spend their time. So they're going to meet with one existing volunteer each week to connect and invite them to a higher level of leadership on the team. That's going to help turn this leader number under their targets. They're going to meet and introduce themselves to 5 to 10 new people each weekend. We hope that drives serving and attendance. I'm going to dedicate 8 hours each week to large group teaching. Hopefully that will create a better program, better experience. Kids will invite their friends and drive attendance. Maybe down here at the bottom, we're going to teach and invite kids to be baptized 3 times a year, aligned with the weekend baptism services. So all that to say, it's that discipline of continuously breaking it down from big goals to ones that I actually know if I'm on your team, this is what success now looks like for me. I know what success looks like for the organization. What does it look like for me? And then how can I drive my time and how I spend it? And so that's that whole fruition of keeping all of us aligned and moving in the same direction. Mm-hmm. So here's a couple of ideas just on how to put it into practice. First, just do a little bit of an assessment. Does every leader know what the win is for their ministry and how it connects to the overarching goals of the church? This is what, like we said, will drive the right thinking and behaviors. And it'll actually protect the church from all that complexity creep that can come in, which, by the way, complexity creep can easily throw you into the maintenance phase. Not every church moves from momentum growth into strategic growth and into sustained health. Sometimes they just take a straight line right across to the maintenance side if we aren't careful. One church that I was just working with, I'll protect their names because they're working on it. But I connect with some of the team leaders, some of the leaders who are kind of at the end of the food chain of decisions. It's a multi-site church. And right now in their multi-site environment, campus pastors, they don't have these goals. And so each location is just kind of coming up with their own programs and events right now. And again, they're probably all great, good programs and events. But in a multi-site church, especially, churches need to focus on what do we have in common? And so complexity like that with a lot of campus-specific innovation can put an incredible strain on areas that are kind of central supporting all the ministries. So complexity creep has fingers in and of its own. Do you have any examples, Sean?
Yeah, I just want to brag on my friends at Anthem Church. They've actually been doing this kind of implementation in this action level of the pyramid at their church for a number of years. And really for them, every couple of months, they sit down with their direct report and they go through and list out their personal priorities that are tied back to the vision of the church. And what I love about what they do, they're actually kind of analog still with this rather than being fully digital, but they actually write down on paper what their priorities are. And then all of them take those papers and they put them up in a sort of central location where everyone can see each other's personal priorities for that couple of months. And what I loved about what that does is it actually creates some peer-to-peer accountability within their team. Everyone has eyes on everyone else's priorities. It helps them to make sure that they're eliminating redundancies where people could be working on sometimes similar or even competing things because their priorities are all listed there. But it also helps them to celebrate the wins that they're going through together. They can see what each person on the team is accomplishing and how that contributes back to the vision. And having all of that centrally located, I think has really helped their team feel more cohesive as they accomplish the mission and more aligned and unified as they do that work together. So I love how they've implemented that at their church and just want to brag on them for a second.
And Sean, I think all of us, we love to check off something that gets done too. It actually brings visibility to the work that's getting done because I actually feel all the work we get done can feel really invisible sometimes in the rapid pace of a church and we just move on. Think about every Sunday, the whole team just pulled together this major event and then Monday it's like off the record, we're just running again. So it actually gives a way to acknowledge the team members and all the work that they're doing.
Yeah, that's so right. I completely agree with that, Amy. Well, we're about to move into our live Q&A portion of the webinar, and I just want to encourage you to finish submitting any of those questions that you've been holding onto throughout the webinar today. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and submit those now. And before we get to that, here's a quick message from our webinar sponsor, and we'll be back with the live Q&A.
Your children's pastor and your finance director probably have different styles of thinking. Instead of forcing them to use the same software, Planning Center gives each ministry different products for checking in kids and taking attendance, receiving and managing giving, planning services and scheduling volunteers, organizing and communicating with small groups, registering and taking payments for events, and managing your facilities on the event calendar. But even though the products are different, they're still connected. In fact, our most important one, Planning Center People, connects them all. Planning Center People is completely free. If you want to try out our other products, each one comes with its own 30-day trial. Learn more about the features of each product or sign up by visiting planning.center. And love your church management software.